So, so I've been having kind of a shitty couple days, real shitty. Just been in a funk. I'm super depressed, and I'm just, I don't think I was fully dealing with the trauma of the fires and facing it totally. And anyway, I got in my car last night and I drove into Altadena, and I drove to the foothills, and it was like block after block after house after mile of just destruction, and witnessing it firsthand. Like, it's been raining, it's been cold, it's been wet, it's been, last night it was really dark. The moon was like behind the clouds, and it was just haunting. It was eerie. It was like this sort of gothic. It looked like Dresden, all black and white photos of just bombed out cities. It was like a bomb. It was like Martians hit Altadena with a death ray. That's what it looked like. And I drove up to my parents' old house, because we used to live in Altadena in the foothills, and I first made a wrong turn. I kind of forgot exactly, because it's been some time since they moved from there, but I turned left off Fair Oaks. I should have turned right, and I got out of my car. There was a black van post up at the end of the street with its lights on. There's a couple dudes with laptops in there patrolling the area, And it was right where they were, that first wave of cleanup, where it's still raw dog and bombed out cars and just every kind of, down trees, and like no cleanup had taken place on that part of the street. So it was these giant row of cranes standing by to do the big heavy duty lifting. And it was the kind of cranes where the tread's almost as tall as you. Huge fucking like 3-story looking cranes with big pincher claws. And there were probably about 20 of them lined up. If you can imagine a little residential street with 20 huge cranes. We're not talking little Bobcat fucking. We're talking big earth moving, like Mac Daddy fuckers. And it was surreal because I'd seen some of the stuff on my phone, but until you experience it firsthand, I parked the car and I just walked up to these fucking things. And then I just started walking up to house after house after house. And it had police tape around a lot of these houses. And I go up to the area where I thought my folks lived, and I was like, oh no, this isn't where they live. So I got back in my car, and I drove east of Fair Oaks, sort of between Marengo and Fair Oaks, on a little street called Palm. And I went up to the house. I, parked the car and walked up to there's like a little wall and like a little driveway. And there, once again, was this police tape. But these were the houses that the cranes had already been at, so there had been that first wave of cleanup already. And a lot of the cars that were bombed out in the driveways had spray paint on them that said no EV. And it was a signifier the city had gone through and spray painted these things and said, they labeled the cars that weren't electric vehicles, because apparently those were the first ones to get cleaned up because of the batteries and all the toxic shit in them. So it was late, it was dark, it was wet, and I looked around and I was like, fuck it, dude, I'm going in. And I crept under the police tape. And I definitely wasn't supposed to be there. And I walked up to my old home. And it was insane. It was... The walls had fallen in. The only thing standing were these two giant chimneys. The person built the house was obsessed with fireplaces and had an outdoor fireplace and an indoor fireplace. And I remember that was such a weird part of the home. But apparently it was like a brick mason built the home and was like really proud of it. They were these big giant hearths, big fireplaces with these like huge smokestacks that went up. And they were the only things. The walls of the house were burnt to the point where they had fallen in on and down into the basement. Like when I looked into the home, the walls had fallen through the floorboards and down into this sort of shallow basement. So it was literally like looking into a hole in the earth. And then I walked up to this 2-car garage, which was just, it looked literally like a death ray hit it. And there were 2 cars parked inside this 2-car garage that were completely bombed out. They just looked like, you couldn't even tell what make or model the car was. It just was like this gray, just hole in the earth kind of death pit of a fucking, what was a vehicle. And I started creeping around the house, I went along the kind of west wall between the garage and sort of like the neighboring subdivision. Because it used to be a bigger lot, and then they subdivided it. And so I crept along the wall, and I was really careful not to step on glass. Because I didn't want to make any noise, because I think a couple homes survived, can you imagine? And the smell was incredible. It was like everything under the earth that you could imagine. Everything under the sky, everything under... I don't know what that expression is. And everything that could burn, the smell of it lingered. Even in the musty, wet, cold, muddy night. And I walked around, and I went into the backyard. And it was this beautiful backyard. I remember we had like this grove of trees, a bunch of avocado trees. And they had taken a lot of those trees out and replaced them with other fruit trees and stuff. And it was like untouched, like the trees had survived, and it was this little meadow. And I walked through, with like moonlight kind of glowing through these big thick clouds. And it was this quiet, and I had so many emotions. I had like survivor's guilt, like this isn't my home. And I felt bad, why was I spared and so many people weren't? And then I was also, the other emotion that started to come up was this curiosity. I wanted to see everything. I wanted to walk into every nook and cranny and just look at it and smell it and turn it over in my hands. And then the other emotion was this feeling of like profound privilege. Like this was my home. And, when you go up, if this event had not occurred, there's no way you can walk up to just some stranger's house in the middle of the night and go, hey, you mind if I walk around your backyard? So there I was, and because of this tragic event, I was able to walk into my old home, and look at it. And there was something really special about because I was like, that's where I learned how to meditate, right there. And I was like, I used to sculpt clay in my dad's little like tool hutch right off the garage right there. And, like, this is where I had a big old argument with my brother. Here's where I used to lounge out, smoke weed, and watch TV. And I could piece together in my mind's eye, in my imagination, I could kind of do this overlay where I could picture the walls, the intact walls, with my parents' artwork on the walls. And I was just like, my eyes were brushing along all this destruction, and I was having these sense memories of like my life in that house. And there was a metal bench in the backyard, and I sat on it. It was wet, cold, and I just sat there, and I just closed my eyes, and I just smelled. And I'm never going to forget that smell, ever. I smelled death. And this nature that was reborn. It was growing in the nooks and crannies. You could feel like the moss and the muddy earth and new life coming in where the death had been. And I thought to myself, and there were all these downed trees from the wind. One that was huge had been uprooted and fell right over, right between the two homes. And you think to yourself, oh, that tree could do a lot of damage. That would be like a normal reaction to seeing a big piece of timber just laying flat on the ground like that. Like, wow, thank God that didn't hit the kitchen. But then you look at all the destruction, you're like, so what? So what if it went right through the fucking living room? Look at this place. It's completely fucking destroyed. I got back in my car and I drove block after block after block after block after street after residential businesses, schools, churches. And Altadena has these big, giant backyards. They're big blocks, like the homes on the outside might look kind of small or whatever. But then they have this vast land behind them. And when the homes are no longer there, you can kind of see, oh, wow, look at that big, giant backyard. Look at that. Look, that's where they hung a swing off of a tree. That's where they had a little garden. That's where somebody laid some beautiful slate stones down to make a walkway. Oh, look, they ran some irrigation to a little raised bed, and they were growing vegetables right there. Oh, lucky for them, they didn't have an EV car. And then you think about the survivors that had, hundreds of neighbors, and now they have like one neighbor. And the walls of their home are so toxic. It's prohibitive to even sleep in that home. But you could tell people were sleeping in their homes because the lights were on and the car was in the driveway. And I drove by the high school, or maybe it was the junior high, I can't remember. But it survived, and it had lights on. and they had a big neon sign up front that said Go Cougars, or Cougar Spirit or something. And I just thought about that school and how it was probably a beacon, holding the community together, because so many of the kids that go to that school lost their homes. Probably 80%. And our school, my son's school, absorbed a lot of those kids. A lot of the Altadena kids ended up coming to Glendale, and now they're in our school because their school burned down. It's just so tragic. It's so tragic when you see it on your phone and you look at the pictures and you see the little flyovers. Yeah. But when you go there in person and you smell it and you feel it in your bones, it changes you. And there's no answers. There's no answers. It reminds me of JFK's assassination, or 9/11, or chemtrails. You look up in the sky and there's no answers. Everybody's got their opinions or their theories or their, how many fucking books are written about JFK? This person did it, that person did it, the mob did it. And will we ever get answers? Is it just a wildfire that I'm looking at? Is that, why were all the trees standing in the backyard untouched? And yet the steel automobiles in the driveway looked as though they had been zapped by a laser cannon. What? Why? Why did this house burn down, but all the houses around it didn't? Do we have to wait 20 years to know the truth? Why do we have to stay in this limbo state? Is that part of the torture? Is that part of the psyop? Is that part of crushing neighborhoods and people? The thing I love about Altadena is there's so many mixed race couples. My parents rented a little cottage on the lot to a couple named Donna and Dewey. It was an old black musician. Sorry, I got cut off there. An old black musician named Dewey, and his white wife Donna, and they were terrific. You walk around Altadena and it was traditionally a black neighborhood. My mom back in the 50s dated a black guy who was from Altadena, who drove a burgundy Mustang. My mom used to tell stories about, him coming by the house and picking her up for a date. You can imagine the 50s, how, I don't know, Norwegian-looking white lady going out with black dude from Altadena. And I mean, so many famous black athletes that were Jackie Robinson went to school in Altadena. Jackie Robinson went to school at John Muir, where my grandfather went to school. And there's like pictures of Willie Mays, and it's just got so many roots. And you got JPL up there, you got NASA, you got all these sort of tech people that live up amongst there. I drove up and down Lake Street and saw, the breakfast place, Fox's, where we used to go and get a heap of pancakes. And it's completely gone. The police precinct across the street, totally gone. It's a real head scratcher. And I don't think we will get answers. And it's just another shame. Just on top of Lahaina and Paradise Fires and like all these unanswered, we still don't have answers about the shootings that took place in Las Vegas. Like how much of this shit can one society endure? And I'm not trying to answer questions right here. I'm not trying to pose any big fucking question. I'm just saying, no matter what side of any topic that you stand, it's frustrating not knowing the cause. It's really frustrating because you can't put it to bed. Because maybe lurking in the back of your mind is that somebody did this on purpose. And that's an act of war. I look at Coca-Cola and Pepsi just signed this big contract with Microsoft. And now they call it fluorescent nanoparticles. Fluorescent NPs are being put in kids' sodas now. And they signed a $1 billion partnership with Microsoft. And Microsoft says, yeah, we're interested in tracking, things with AI. And these fluorescent nanoparticles, they respond to frequency. In other words, they send little microsignals back and forth. So, and it's crossing the blood-brain barrier. So these things can accumulate in the tissue of your brain. And I got a kid that goes to birthday parties, and there's always Coke at these birthday parties. And where do I put my foot down? I don't want my son drinking Coke because I don't want him to accumulate these fluorescent nanoparticles in his brain that communicate with devices to give feedback to AI. What is it, for marketing? Do you really have to be under my kid's skin in order to market to him? Where does this dystopian science fiction nightmare that we're finding ourselves in, where the fuck does it end? Where's our dignity begin? Where does our sense of privacy begin? You know? Are any of these bodies ours anymore? Or are they just beacons for the surveillance state? I know I'm sounding a bit inflammatory here, but at the same time, I'm just like, this shit's in published, peer-reviewed science journals. You know? I'm not a tinfoil hat maniac for bringing this up, because it's real. And it's just gotten a little fucking crazy.